Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified. Here we will take up the news articles from The Hindu of Delhi edition and discuss them as per the demands of UPSC Civil Services exam. The topics for today's discussion are listed on your screen. Let us begin our discussion. The first topic of today's discussion is based on these two news which appeared on page number 2 and page number 7 respectively. It basically talks about the tussle between center government and Delhi government. And the context is that despite the Supreme Court's ruling in favor of Delhi government over the control of services, including transfers and postings of its officers, the union government has introduced an ordinance which bypassed the judgment as it re-empowers center over the services under Delhi government. It further increased the friction between two governments. This topic is relevant for General Studies paper 2 as the ordinance making power of president comes under the structure and functioning of executive. Ordinance and the issues which are related to it is an important and recurring theme in UPSC mains exam. In 2015, a question was asked regarding the violation of separation of power due to the ordinance. A question on legality of repromulgation of ordinances was asked. From these two questions, it appears that ordinance is an important topic under General Studies paper 2. And today we will try to analyze the different aspects which are related to ordinance. And before that, we will try to analyze the National Capital Services Authority, which is created by an ordinance passed by union government. The center government has issued an ordinance to constitute National Capital Civil Services Authority in Delhi. And as per the ordinance, the authority will be headed by Chief Minister of Delhi and will comprise Chief Secretary and Home Secretary of Delhi government. And this authority is empowered to decide on the issue of transfer and posting of Group A officers and DNS officers who are serving in Delhi government. And it will decide the matters through majority of votes of its members present and voting. This authority will give effect to the intent and purpose behind the Article 239AA. And it is being introduced to make recommendations to Lieutenant Governor regarding the matters concerning transfers, vigilance and other incidental matters. This was all about the recent ordinance which central governments brought in to take control over the services of officers who are working under Delhi government. Now we will try to analyze the ordinance in detail. Under Article 123 of Indian Constitution, President is empowered to promulgate ordinances during the recess of Parliament. And these ordinances have same force and effect as an act of Parliament, but they are in nature of temporary laws. An ordinance is the most important legislative power of President which has been vested in him to deal with unforeseen and urgent matters. If a question appears on ordinance, you can start your answer with this introduction. Always try to mention the articles while writing answers on polity questions. Now we will see the conditions under which the ordinance can be made. President can promulgate ordinance only when both houses or one house is not in session. Further, an ordinance made when the both houses are in session is void. Thus, the power of president to legislate by ordinance is not a parallel power of legislation. So this is the first condition. The second is, President can make ordinance only when he is satisfied that circumstances exist that render it necessary for him to take immediate action. And in Cooper case of 1970, Supreme Court held that the satisfaction of President can be questioned in a court on the ground of mala fide, which makes the power of President to make an ordinance open for judicial review. And the ordinance can be issued only on the subjects on which the Parliament can make laws. Further, it is also subject to the same constitutional limitation as an act of Parliament. That means an ordinance cannot abridge or take away any of the fundamental rights which are provided to the citizens of country. And the next one is related to the expiry of ordinance. Every ordinance which is issued by President during the recess of Parliament must be laid down before the both houses of Parliament when it reassembles. And if Parliament takes no action at all, the ordinance ceases to operate on the expiry of 6 weeks from the reassembly of Parliament. Further, The ordinance may also cease to operate even earlier than the prescribed 6 weeks if both houses of parliament passes a resolution disapproving the ordinance. And if the houses of parliament are summoned to reassemble on different dates, the period of 6 weeks is calculated from the letter of those dates. This means that the maximum life of an ordinance can be 6 months plus 6 weeks in case of non-approval by parliament, because 6 months being the maximum gap between the two sessions of parliament. And lastly, president can also withdraw an ordinance at any time, but it is not a discretionary power of president, and he can promulgate or withdraw an ordinance only on the advice of Council of Ministers, which is headed by Prime Minister of India. So these are the broad conditions related to ordinance. Now we will discuss the need of ordinances. The first one is related to emergency situation. Ordinances provide a mechanism for government to swiftly address the pressing issues that require immediate attention, which includes the matter of national security, economic crisis, or public order. In situations where waiting for next session of parliament could result in delays, ordinances serve as a mean for timely action. So it plays an important role to deal with the emergency situations. The second one is to prevent deadlock. There are many instances when the government and opposition does not reach to a consensus on a specific issues, where ordinances provide an alternative pathway to the government to pass essential laws, and it will help in averting the legislative deadlock and ensures that the crucial matters are addressed even in the absence of consensus. And the next one is flexibility. While the legislative process in parliament often involves time-consuming debates, discussions, and deliberations, whereas ordinances offer a more flexible and adaptable approach to legislation. They enable the government to promptly respond to evolving circumstances without the need to wait for entire legislative process to be completed. And this flexibility ensures agile and responsive decision making in the House of Parliament. And lastly, to bypass the disruptive tactics of opposition, which sometimes hinders the process of governance by opposing crucial bills. As we have discussed the need for ordinance, now let us try to analyze the issues which are associated with ordinance. The first one is misuse of power. The power to issue ordinances is vested in the executive branch of government, which raises concerns about the potential misuse for political gains, in which some decisions can be made without proper scrutiny. And some critics argue that ordinances can be utilized as a shortcut to enact policies without adequate parliamentary debate and consensus building, which undermines the democratic process. The next one is bypassing legislative procedure. When parliament is not in session, the President of India, upon the advice of Council of Ministers, can issue ordinances, and this grants the government the ability to bypass discussions and debates on crucial issues. And it further undermines the democratic principles by diminishing the scope for public scrutiny. For example, the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India was created in 1997, first by an ordinance and then by the Act of Parliament. Frequent promulgation of ordinances give rise to suspicion among the general public regarding the intent of government, and it impacts the public trust in the system, which will impact the foundation of parliamentary democracy in India. The next one is Ordinance Raj. The repeated and extensive issuance of ordinance can give rise to a phenomena called Ordinance Raj, and this frequent promulgation can pose a potential threat to regular legislative process and democratic principles. In DC Wadhwa case of 1987, Supreme Court has said that successive re-promulgation of ordinances with same text without any attempt to get the bills passed by assembly would amount to the violation of constitution. Just remember this particular case, and whenever you write answers to the polity questions, try to mention the cases which are related to that particular issue. It will bring authenticity to your answer. Further, there is a lack of public participation in ordinance making procedure, as ordinances restricts the chance for public representatives to engage in debates and discussion concerning the proposed laws, which further diminishes the scope of public participation, leading to lack of diverse perspectives and limited stakeholder involvement, which may result into laws which are not fulfilling the goal of public welfare. The next one is hasty decision making. The limited time for thorough analysis, deliberation, and consultation may result in an increased risk of poorly drafted or ill considered laws. And to tackle the pressing matters or urgent situations, there is a potential drawback of hasty decisions while framing ordinances. The next one is violation of separation of power. Through the issuance of ordinances, the executive branch assumes the legislative function, which violates the separation of power, as the lawmaking power is the domain of legislature and not of executive. Here we have discussed the 7 issues which are associated with ordinance. One more thing which we want to highlight is that whenever you make notes for your mains exam, just try to mention the headings or keywords in your notes so that it becomes easier for you to revise before actual exam. And finally, what can be the way forward to this particular issue? The first one is limit the ordinances which can be promulgated in a year so that the misuse of power can be curtailed through this particular reform. The next one is increase the parliamentary sittings to discuss the important issues which are concerning the general public. And the last one is opposition days. It can be quoted as a case study as in United Kingdom there are specific days which are allocated in parliamentary calendar for debates and motions initiated by opposition parties. And these days allow opposition parties to set the agenda and bring forward the topics for discussion which challenges the government policies and actions. It will lead to constructive criticism of government policies, which will be beneficial for welfare of people and democracy. After discussing the different aspects of ordinance, I hope that you will be able to write a decent answer to these questions. A quick recap to our discussion. First of all, we have discussed the context, its relevance for General Studies Paper 2. We have seen the previous year questions, the recent ordinance which created the National Capital Civil Services Authority, what is ordinance, the conditions for ordinance. We also discussed the need for ordinance, the issues which are associated with ordinance, and a way forward. Next topic of today's discussion is based on this news which appeared on page number 7 in The Hindu. This article specifically talks about the primary schools in India. In Jharkhand, many schools suffers from a severe shortage of teachers, which results in single teacher schools that struggle to provide quality education to children. And the proportion of single teacher schools in Jharkhand is 1/3, and similar issues exist in other states as well. This topic is relevant for General Studies Paper 2, in which social justice is mentioned, and education is an important sub-theme in that particular section. Moreover, in 2021, UPSC asked about vocational education and skill training in General Studies Paper 2. And in 2022, a question was asked on right of children to Free and Compulsory Education Act 2009. By looking at these questions, we get an idea that education is an important and recurring theme in UPSC Civil Services exam. And in today's discussion, we will try to discuss the issues of primary schools in a question answer format. The question says, account for the reasons for poor state of foundational literacy and numeracy in India and suggest some measures in this regard. You need to answer this question in 250 words. Before discussing this question, let us try to understand what is this foundational literacy and numeracy. Foundational literacy and numeracy refers to basic skills in reading, writing, and mathematics. It is the ability of a child to read and understand a basic text and perform simple mathematical calculations by the end of grade 3. Strong literacy and numeracy help children to learn, experiment, and reason, and to be active and informed citizen, which further contributes socially, culturally, and economically. The National Education Policy of 2020 accords the highest importance to the achievement of foundational literacy and numeracy. Without understanding the meaning of foundational literacy and numeracy, it will be difficult for you to answer this particular question. Now we will try to analyze the reasons for poor state of foundational literacy and numeracy which is directly asked in the question. The first reason is lack of early childcare and education. Over 85% of child's brain development occurs prior to the age of 6 years. And presently, the quality childcare and education is not available to millions of young children, particularly children from socially and economically disadvantaged groups. The next one is poor status of Anganwadis. The Anganwadi workers are overworked with duties and responsibilities that center around her being a teacher, nurse, and a social service provider. Further, Anganwadi workers are not equipped with necessary tools to be able to engage children in learning experiences. So, it is an important reason behind the low foundational literacy. The third one is nutritional deficiency among children. The relationship between nutrition, health, and learning is undeniably strong. But as per the Global Hunger Index, India has the highest child wasting, which is around 17% of all the countries, which impacts the learning development of children. And the next one is inadequate budget. The National Education Policy recommended that India spends at least 6% of its GDP on education. But even today, as per the economic survey, India spends only around 3% of its GDP on education. Hence, it became an important reason behind the poor performance of primary schools in India. The next one is low pupil to teacher ratio. As per the Right to Education Act 2009, the desired teacher to pupil ratio has set to 1:35. According to certain reports, around 40% of the government elementary schools have only one or two teachers for all elementary grades. And you can also quote the UDI's report, which specifically talked about the primary schools which are run by a lone teacher. And in this context, you can quote the case study of Jharkhand, which we have discussed in the context. The next reason is poor pedagogic skills. Due to this particular issue, teachers are not able to impart knowledge to children through innovative techniques, and it further creates a gap between teacher and children in the learning landscape. And the last one is linguistic issues. The medium of instruction is often different from mother tongue of children, and it negatively impacts the child's motivation to engage in classroom process. So these are the broad reasons behind the poor state of foundational literacy and numeracy in India. There is one more reason which you can quote is the impact of COVID. The COVID pandemic has exacerbated the existing crisis of poor learning outcomes in India, and it has happened because the massive learning loss due to the long-term school closures, and there was a digital divide at household and school level. Further, the diversion of state funds to COVID pandemic has resulted the limited education fund as well. And it also gave the challenge to families and teachers because children might come back to school with severe mental health issues. You can add this reason to your answer. Now, what can be the way forward in this regard? The first one is increase the budget allocation with focused investment on foundational literacy and numeracy. Further, there is need of alignment of synergies between Ministry of Women and Child Development and Ministry of Education. Also, nutrition and education are both equally important and require significant time and effort. So it is worthwhile to consider having 2 Anganwadi workers per Anganwadi, as it will reduce the burden of work on the Anganwadi workers and increase their reach to different households. And the next one is provision of primary education in mother tongue. It is also provided in the new education policy of 2020. And finally, ensure minimum instruction time in schools and learning at home. The Right to Education Act 2009 requires that children from grade 1 to 5 spend at least 200 days involving 800 instruction hours in the school. Currently, different states are seen allocating in different amount of time for literacy instruction, which range from 35 minutes in some states to 90 minutes in other states. So there needs to be a standard block of time across all states to bring uniformity in the learning outcomes across different states. And finally, you can conclude with the Nipun Bharat program, which focuses on ensuring that every child in the country necessarily attains foundational literacy and numeracy by 2026. And you can also mention SDG 4, which talks about quality education in your concluding remark. So in this topic, we have discussed the context, its relevance for the General Studies paper 2. We have also seen the previous year questions, and we have discussed one mains question regarding the foundational literacy and numeracy. I hope this discussion will help you in enriching your understanding regarding answer writing. Moving on to the next topic of today's discussion, which is based on this news, which featured on page number 4 in The Hindu. It basically talks about cyber crimes in India, and country's largest cybercrime networks in the national capital's backyard in Haryana's Nuh district was busted last month, and 66 accused were arrested who duped around 28,000 people, which includes the money amounted to 100 crore. Cybersecurity is an important area under General Studies paper 3, in which basics of cybersecurity is directly mentioned. In 2019, UPSC asked about Cyberdome and how it can be helpful in controlling internet crimes in India. Again in 2022, UPSC asked about different elements of cybersecurity, which makes this area important for our discussion. Today we will try to analyze the basics of cybersecurity. We will first try to analyze the cyber threats. The first one is cyber espionage. It is an act or practice of obtaining secret information that is personal, sensitive, or of classified nature from individuals, competitors, or government using a malicious software such as Trojan horse or spyware. And the motive behind this particular practice is to obtain secret information which could go against our national security. It is one of the important threat in cyber domain. The second one is cyber attack. It targets computer information systems and computer networks, and the motive behind this is to damage or destroy the targeted computer network or system. And the next one is cyber terrorism. It is about convergence of terrorism and cyberspace, as cyberspace has been used by terrorists for a number of purposes such as recruitment, attacks, and spreading the propaganda to radicalize people and to raise funding. The next one in the list is cyber warfare. Warfare conducted by a country or its proxies to attack computer systems in other countries, and it can include theft, vandalism, and destruction of critical information infrastructure. Here we have discussed the 4 major cyber threats. Now we will try to analyze the impact of cyber attacks in India. The first one is loss of integrity. The unauthorized changes made to data or IT system can result in inaccuracy, fraud, or decisions that bring integrity of system under suspicion. And the next one is loss of availability. An attack on a mission critical IT system or a personal system makes it unavailable to the end user. Let us assume you have a personal computer and it is being attacked for some purpose. And some spywares are of nature that you will not be able to use your system without getting permission from the attacker. The third one is loss of confidentiality. The consequences of unauthorized disclosure of information ranges from loss of public confidence to national security threats. And the next is physical destruction. Ability to create actual physical harm or destruction using the IT system. The next one is impact on data. As we all know, data is one of the most important element in present times. And if a system is compromised by attackers, then it will impact the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. The next in the list is impact on critical information infrastructure. Presently, most of the serious sectors are critically dependent on the use of ICT to carry on their operations, such as telecom sector, energy sector, and nuclear power. Cyber attacks on these critical infrastructures can bring the entire country to a halt. For example, the recent Chinese cyber attack on power system in Mumbai brought the entire city to halt, and the local trains, which are considered as Mumbai's lifeline, stopped functioning and people got stuck. And the next one is Financial loss. According to the Data Security Council of India, India has been the second most cyber attacks affected country between 2016 to 2018. And the last one is national security and peace. If there is a cyber attack on critical infrastructure, then it may impact the national security, peace, and stability in the country. Here we have discussed the different impacts of cyber attack. Now we will try to analyze the preparedness of cyber security in India. The first one is related to Section 66F of Information Technology Act 2000. Specific provisions dealing with the issue of cyber terrorism that covers denial of access, unauthorized access, introduction of computer contaminant leading to harm persons, property, critical infrastructure, or disruption of supplies. These all are included in this particular section of IT Act. The next one is National Cybersecurity Policy of 2013. It was a policy document drafted by the Department of Electronics and Information Technology to streamline the process of cybersecurity in India. And the next one is National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center, which is also known as NCIIPC. It was established under Information Technology Act 2000 to secure India's critical information infrastructure. It is designated as National Nodal Agency in respect of critical information infrastructure protection, and it works under NTRO, which is the National Technical Research Organization. The next is CERT-In. It is an organization under Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology with an objective of securing India's cyberspace. The purpose of CERT-In is to respond to computer security incidents and report on vulnerabilities. It also promotes effective IT security practices throughout the country. And the next in the list is Cyber Surakshat Bharat Initiative. It was launched in 2018 with an aim to spread awareness about cybercrime and building capacity for safety measures for Chief Information Security Officers. And the next is National Cyber Coordination Center. It seeks to generate necessary situational awareness of existing and potential cybersecurity threats and enable timely information sharing for proactive, preventive, and protective actions by individual entities. The next is National Cybersecurity Coordinator. It works under National Security Council Secretariat, which coordinates with different agencies at national level for cybersecurity matters. And the last one is Information Security Education and Awareness Project, which is also known as ISEA. It focuses on training of personnel to raise awareness and to provide research, education, and training in the field of information security. A quick recap to our discussion. First of all, we have discussed the context and its relevance for General Studies Paper 3, in which the basics of cybersecurity is directly mentioned. We have also seen the previous year questions and the basics of cybersecurity, in which we have discussed the major cyber threats. Further, we discussed the impacts of cyber attacks in India and the cybersecurity preparedness. The last topic of today's discussion is based on this news, which featured on page number 8 in The Hindu. It basically talks about open network for digital commerce. The Union government is looking to formally launch the Open Network for Digital Commerce, which is famously known as ONDC, this year to democratize e-commerce in India. While government has urged companies to join ONDC platform, major e-commerce players such as Amazon and Flipkart have been reluctant to get on board. This topic is important for General Studies Paper 3, in which the awareness in the field of IT and computers is directly mentioned. And UPSC in 2022 asked a question related to e-commerce. And in 2015, a direct question on e-commerce came in General Studies Paper 3 of UPSC Mains exam, which makes this topic important for UPSC Civil Services exam. In this topic, we will discuss what is ONDC and why the government is pushing for it. The government wants to change the fundamental structure of e-commerce market from the current platform-centric model to open network model. Now, what is this platform-centric model? Amazon and Flipkart, they are the two e-commerce players, and they have their own platform to sell the items to public, and it is called the platform-centric model. Now the government is pushing towards the open network model, which is modeled after the unified payments interface. The UPI allows people to send or receive money irrespective of the payment platforms on which they are registered. For example, if you want to make a payment, you can just scan the QR code and make payment from PhonePe, Paytm or Google Pay. And in a similar way, government wants to ensure that buyers and sellers on e-commerce market can transact regardless of the platform on which they are registered, like in the case of UPI. And under ONDC, a buyer who is registered on Amazon may directly purchase the goods from a seller who sells on Flipkart. And the pilot version of ONDC was launched last year in few major cities, and thousands of sellers have already been on board onto the platform. In a simple language, it is a platform, and let us assume you want to buy a cricket ball. And this platform will show the price of different sellers, for example Amazon and Flipkart. And it is your wish from where you want to buy that particular ball. So in this way, both the buyer and seller will be benefited. So this is the whole plan which government is trying to implement. As this project is still in nascent stage, we will just try to highlight why the government is pushing for it. Firstly, government believes that ONDC will put an end to the domination of e-commerce market by a few large platforms, for example Amazon and Flipkart. Further, government says that the e-commerce market is currently broken into silos, and the private platforms like Amazon and Flipkart have been accused of promoting certain seller entities in which they hold indirect stakes. And similarly, Swiggy and Zomato have been accused of charging high commissions from sellers. Further, with an open network like ONDC that connects buyer and sellers across platforms, the government hopes that it will create a level playing field and make private platforms redundant. So for these reasons, government is trying to formally launch the open network for digital commerce, which will invariably benefit the buyers and sellers. The 2022 prelims question says, with reference to foreign owned e-commerce firms which are operating in India, which of the following statements is or are correct? The first statement says, they can sell their own goods in addition to offering their platforms as marketplace. It is an incorrect statement because the foreign owned companies cannot sell their own goods. And the second statement says the degree to which they can own big sellers on their platforms is limited. It is a correct statement, and the answer to this question becomes B, which is 2 only. And a quick recap to our discussion. First of all, we have discussed the context, its relevance for General Studies paper 3. We have also seen a prelims and mains question. We have discussed what is ONDC and why the government is pushing for it. That's all for today's discussion. Thank you for watching today's DNS, and stay tuned for upcoming sessions as it will enhance your preparation for the mains exam.